The security camera in Courtroom 3B recorded something that would ruin a woman's entire life in under 8 minutes. Jennifer Parker, a 35-year-old real estate agent who had spent her whole adult life using money to avoid consequences, pushed a white envelope filled with $5,000 in cash across the clerk's desk. What she murmured next would become the most incriminating piece of evidence in what Judge Judy later described as the most shameless act of courtroom corruption she had seen in 35 years on the bench. Those few seconds of footage would be viewed more than 17 million times within the first 48 hours after the episode aired, shared across every social media platform with captions like "The moment entitlement met justice and she tried to bribe Judge Judy's court and instantly regretted it." But what makes this story truly unbelievable, and what turned it into the most viral courtroom moment in television history is that Jennifer Parker didn't just try to bribe a court employee on camera. She didn't just commit a federal felony that could carry a 15-year prison sentence. What Judge Judy uncovered during her investigation was far worse, so much more far-reaching that it sparked a multi-state criminal inquiry and revealed a pattern of corruption that had been happening for years before getting into the complete downfall of the most arrogant criminal ever caught on Judge Judy's show. You need to understand who Jennifer Parker was and why she entered that courtroom with a confidence that could only come from someone who had never faced real consequences for her actions. Jennifer wasn't just another entitled suburban mother who believed the rules didn't apply to her. She was something far more dangerous. She was a woman who had deliberately used her wealth and charm to manipulate the legal system itself, leaving behind a trail of victims who never received justice. Because she had mastered the art of buying her way out of responsibility, this was a woman who had resolved a sexual harassment complaint from a former employee, using a cash payout and a non-disclosure agreement that protected her real estate. Licensed, this was a woman who had been sued 17 times throughout her career and had somehow managed to win or quietly settle every case under circumstances that always seemed just a bit too convenient, a bit too favorable. For someone with her documented history of harmful behavior, the case that brought Jennifer Parker into Judge Judy's courtroom appeared simple on the surface, almost dull by daytime television standards. Margaret Chen, a 78-year-old woman who had been a landlord for 4 decades, was suing Jennifer for $12,000 in property damage. Jennifer had rented one of Margaret's properties, a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburban neighborhood with a lease that clearly prohibited subletting, pets, and any unauthorized changes. Within 6 months, Jennifer had violated every part of that lease and more. She had illegally sublet the home to 3 separate tenants without Margaret's knowledge or permission, collecting rent from all of them while paying Margaret only the original lease amount. She had allowed those subtenants to keep multiple large dogs that ruined the hardwood floors, chewed door frames, and left the entire home smelling of animal waste. She had approved extensive unauthorized renovations, including removing a load-bearing wall, installing fixtures that violated building codes, and painting over original woodwork that had been preserved for decades. When Margaret finally learned what was happening and attempted to evict Jennifer, she returned to find her property damaged beyond anything she had encountered in 40 years of managing rentals. Margaret Chen arrived in court with meticulous documentation. She had photographs of every room before Jennifer moved in, showing pristine condition, beautiful original features, and well-maintained systems. She also had photos taken after Jennifer's tenancy, showing holes in walls, destroyed floors, broken appliances, damaged fixtures, and clear evidence of code violations that would cost thousands to repair. She had receipts from contractors, totaling exactly $12,347 to restore the property to a rentable condition. She had copies of the lease agreement Jennifer had signed, with Jennifer's signature clearly visible on every page outlining the rules she had violated. She had statements from neighbors who had seen the steady flow of subtenants, heard the noise, and observed the property's deterioration. She had everything necessary to win the case easily. And Judge Judy's producers had scheduled it as a quick, 15-minute segment because the evidence was so overwhelming. What? No one knew what Margaret Chen herself could never have. Imagine was that Jennifer Parker had spent 3 hours before the court session carrying out a plan that would turn a simple property damage dispute into a federal criminal investigation that would dominate the news for weeks. Jennifer arrived at the courthouse at 6:30 that morning, a full 3 hours before her scheduled appearance. This wasn't anxiety or preparation. This was reconnaissance. She parked her Mercedes in the visitor lot and sat in the car for 20 minutes, applying makeup with the focus of someone getting ready for a performance, straightening her designer outfit, and, most importantly, counting the cash she had withdrawn from 3 separate ATMs the night before to avoid triggering bank reporting requirements. $5,000 and $100 bills, neatly stacked in an unmarked white envelope that she slipped into her Prada handbag, along with fabricated evidence and rehearsed lies. She had done this before, not in Judge Judy's courtroom, but in 3 other civil cases over the past 5 years. A bit of cash to a clerk here, a generous gift to a court administrator there. Always paired with subtle hints about making sure the judge understood her side. It had worked every time, because Jennifer had figured out something most people never realized. The legal system wasn't only about evidence and arguments, it was about relationships, access, and knowing who to approach when no one was looking. David Martinez had been a court clerk on Judge Judy's show for 15 years. He had processed thousands of cases, dealt with countless litigants, and witnessed every form of human behavior that courtroom pressure could provoke. He had seen people cry, shout, beg, threaten, and crumble under the weight of their own lies. But in all those years, he had never been directly offered a bribe until Jennifer Parker walked up to his desk with an envelope and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. David was reviewing case files for the morning session when Jennifer appeared. Glancing around the hallway with the practiced casualness of someone checking for witnesses, she began with small talk, asking how long he had worked there. Noting how professional everything looked, praising the efficiency of the court. David replied politely but briefly, already sensing that something was off. Long-time court staff develop an instinct for when someone is leading up to something improper. Then Jennifer leaned in, dropped her voice to a whisper, and said something David would later repeat word for word in his testimony. She claimed the situation was merely a misunderstanding between her and an elderly landlord who was confused about the property's condition, that she had evidence that would clear everything up, and that she simply wanted to be sure Judge Judy understood the situation correctly from the start. David stayed composed, though his mind was already running through the protocol for handling this kind of situation. Then Jennifer slid the envelope across his desk, her perfectly manicured hand leaving it directly in front of him. And she spoke the words the security camera's audio would capture with devastating clarity. She said it was just a thank you for his excellent service, that she appreciated people who understood how things really worked, and that perhaps he could make sure her evidence was presented first so the judge could see the whole picture before listening to a confused old woman who probably didn't remember things accurately. David looked down at the envelope, then up at her expectant expression, and said firmly that he could not accept it. Jennifer's smile didn't fade. She pushed the envelope closer and insisted it wasn't a bribe. It was a gift. She said no one needed to know about it. She claimed she was simply being generous to someone who worked hard. Even adding that $5,000 meant nothing to her, just a small token of appreciation. and that she was sure someone living on a clerk's salary could use extra money. That last line loaded with condescension and contempt. For anyone who earned less than she did was the moment. David Martinez decided not only to refuse the money, but to make certain Jennifer Parker faced every consequence for trying to offer it. David gave a discreet hand signal to courthouse security, a gesture Jennifer completely missed because she was too focused on what she believed was her successful manipulation of the system. He told her he needed to process some paperwork and asked her to wait in the hallway. The moment she turned away, David sealed the envelope in an evidence bag, contacted his supervisor, and activated a protocol that involved courthouse security, the show's legal team, and ultimately Judge Judy herself. Within 15 minutes, everyone who needed to know about the bribery attempt was informed. Within 30 minutes, the security footage had been reviewed, the audio isolated and enhanced, and the decision made to let Jennifer Parker walk into the courtroom believing her scheme had worked. Judge Judy was briefed before taking the bench, and anyone who knew her could have predicted what was coming next. She wasn't simply going to rule against Jennifer Parker. She was going to make an example of her one that would echo through legal history and remind every entitled offender that some judges cannot be bought, threatened, or manipulated. Jennifer Parker entered Judge Judy's courtroom with the kind of confidence only someone who thinks the game is rigged in their favor can possess. She had changed into an even more expensive outfit, a tailored navy suit that projected polished success, pearl earrings more costly than most people's monthly rent, and shoes that clicked across the courtroom floor with the authority of someone who had rarely been denied anything. She held her leather portfolio like armor, filled with documents she had carefully chosen and, in some cases, fabricated to support her narrative as she took her place at the defendant's table. She actually looked over at David Martinez and gave him a slight smile and nod, a gesture she believed reflected their newfound alliance. David kept his expression neutral, hiding the storm that was about to fall on her. Jennifer had no idea the envelope she had given him now sat in an evidence bag in Judge Judy's chambers. She had no idea the security footage had already been reviewed by multiple people. She had no idea she was no longer facing a simple civil case about property damage. She was stepping directly into a trap that would dismantle everything she had spent her adult life constructing. Margaret Chen sat at the plaintiff's table, looking every bit her 78 years tired, worried, and carrying the burden of someone who had been financially devastated by a person she once trusted. She wore a simple dress, sensible shoes, and no jewelry except her wedding ring from the husband she had lost 5 years earlier. In her lap, she held a folder containing the evidence for her case, photographs and receipts organized with the precision of someone who had spent 40 years managing rental properties and documenting everything. When Judge Judy entered the courtroom and everyone stood, Margaret rose slowly, struggling because her arthritis made the movement painful. Jennifer, meanwhile, stood flawlessly poised, projecting the false confidence of someone who believed she had already bought the outcome she wanted. The bailiff announced the case: Margaret Chen versus Jennifer Parker, a property damage claim for $12,000. Judge Judy took her seat, arranged her notes with deliberate care, and fixed her gaze on Jennifer with an expression that seasoned viewers would recognize as the calm before a devastating storm. But Jennifer, blinded by her arrogance and convinced her bribe had secured her advantage, mistook the look for simple judicial focus. Margaret Chen's testimony was heartbreaking in its clarity and honesty. She explained that she had been a landlord for 40 years, had always treated her tenants fairly, and had maintained her properties with pride. Jennifer Parker, she said, was the worst tenant she had ever had. Her voice shook as she described returning to the house after Jennifer's eviction and finding damage so severe it made her physically ill. She presented Photographs that told the story more powerfully than words. Hardwood floors she had maintained for 30 years now, gouged and stained beyond repair. Original crown molding from 1962, chewed by dogs and ripped from the walls. A once spotless kitchen now filled with broken cabinets, non-functional appliances, and signs of unreported grease fires. A bathroom where someone had attempted to install a jacuzzi tub without permits or professional help, causing water damage that rotted through the subflooring and threatened the structure of the entire sick way. Room Margaret's hands trembled as she showed contractor estimates, each one detailed and documented, showing that restoring the property to rentable condition would cost $12,347. She explained that she lived on a fixed income, that this property had been part of her retirement plan, and that Jennifer's actions had cost her not only money but the trust that had sustained her business for decades. Judge Judy listened intently, asking precise questions that showed her deep understanding of property law and the landlord-tenant relationship. She examined each photograph carefully, reviewed every receipt, and made notes with the discipline of someone constructing an airtight legal record. Then she turned her attention to Jennifer Parker, and anyone watching could feel the shift in the room. Judge Judy asked Jennifer to explain her version of events, to tell the court why she believed she did not owe Margaret $12,000 for the documented damage. Jennifer's answer was a display of entitled arrogance wrapped in feigned victimhood. She claimed Margaret was exaggerating the damage, that the house had already been in poor condition when she moved in, and that Margaret was simply a confused elderly woman who didn't understand that rental properties naturally experience wear and tear. She even used the phrase normal wear and tear to describe holes in walls and destroyed floors. She implied Margaret was trying to exploit the court system to get free renovations paid for by someone with more money. She rolled her eyes when Judge Judy questioned her about specific damage, sighing dramatically as though she were dealing with people who didn't understand how the real world operated. Judge Judy let Jennifer finish her condescending explanation, allowed her to complete her dismissive portrayal of Margaret as a confused old woman, and even permitted her to present her fabricated evidence with a patience that longtime viewers recognized as the warning sign that something explosive was about to happen. Jennifer was actually smiling as she finished her defense, convinced that her earlier attempt at courthouse corruption was about to pay off. She glanced again at David Martinez, still waiting for some subtle sign that her bribe had secured her favorable treatment, still entirely unaware that every person in the courtroom, except her, knew exactly what was coming. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers, and allowed a heavy silence to settle over the room like the stillness before a hurricane hits. Then she leaned forward, and her voice shifted into that dangerous, quiet tone that anyone familiar with her show recognized as the warning that someone's entire world was about to collapse. She said that before ruling on the property damage case, there was another matter that had to be addressed, something that had occurred earlier that morning, something far more serious than $12,000 in property destruction. Jennifer's confident smile faltered for a moment, a tiny crack in her carefully maintained facade, but she quickly recovered, still unaware of just how catastrophic the next few minutes would be. Judge Judy reached beneath her bench and lifted a clear evidence bag containing a white envelope, holding it up so the cameras could capture it perfectly. She announced that at approximately 9:47 that morning, Jennifer Parker had approached the court clerk's desk and attempted to bribe a court official with $5,000 in cash. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Jennifer's face went through a series of expressions the cameras caught in painful detail. First, confusion, as if she couldn't quite understand what she had heard. Then recognition as the reality registered. And finally, sheer terror as the weight of federal felony charges crashed down on the world of privilege and purchased immunity she had spent her life constructing. The color didn't just drain from her face. The color didn't just fade from her face, it vanished entirely, leaving her looking like a wax figure melting under intense lights. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged, as though her vocal cords had forgotten how to function. Her hands, once confidently resting on the defendant's table, began trembling so violently that the papers in front of her rustled. Judge Judy was far from finished, she explained. In exact legal terms, what Jennifer had done. She described how Jennifer approached David Martinez, initiated a conversation meant to build rapport, and then produced an envelope containing $5,000 in cash. She noted that all the bills were hundreds, indicating deliberate planning rather than a momentary lapse. She revealed that the entire exchange had been captured on courthouse security cameras with audio so clear that every word Jennifer whispered could be heard and would be played for federal prosecutors. Then Judge Judy did something that elevated the moment. From ordinary courtroom drama to legal legend. She played the recording for the entire courtroom. Jennifer's voice came through the speakers, artificially pleasant at first, then dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she offered the money and suggested David could ensure Judge Judy saw things properly. The most incriminating part was Jennifer saying that $5,000 meant nothing to her, and that someone on a clerk's salary could surely use extra money. That line, dripping with contempt for anyone who earned less than she did, revealed exactly who Jennifer Parker truly was. She wasn't just corrupt. She was dismissive of the very people whose integrity kept the justice system functioning. Jennifer finally managed to speak. But what came out was exactly what Judge Judy and everyone else anticipated. Denial, excuses, attempts to redefine events, and desperate backtracking from someone who had finally encountered consequences she couldn't purchase her way out of. She stuttered that it wasn't a bribe, but a gift. Thank you for excellent service. Judge Judy cut her off with surgical precision, asking what service David had provided before the money was offered, why Jennifer had told him to make sure her evidence was presented first, and why she had said no one needed to know about the exchange. Jennifer's attempts to answer unraveled into incoherent fragments that contradicted one another within seconds. She claimed she was simply being generous, then insisted it was a misunderstanding, then said she hadn't intended anything improper, cycling through explanations, like someone drowning and grabbing at anything that might keep them afloat for even a moment longer. Judge Judy dismantled every excuse Jennifer tried to offer, shutting each one down as quickly as it appeared, using Jennifer's own recorded words against her with the precision of a prosecutor who had spent decades mastering the art of exposing liars. Then, Judge Judy revealed something that made Jennifer's situation immeasurably worse. She explained that the bribery attempt had prompted a review of Jennifer's legal history and that the investigation revealed a pattern of suspiciously favorable outcomes in cases Jennifer should have lost. Judge Judy presented the findings with the methodical clarity of someone assembling a criminal case built to withstand federal scrutiny. She revealed that Jennifer had been sued 17 times in the last 8 years, and in 14 of those cases, she had obtained outcomes that were statistically improbable given the strength of the evidence against her. 3 cases had been dismissed due to technicalities that seasoned attorneys found questionable, for had settled for far less than plaintiffs should have received considering the documented damages. 7 had ended in verdicts that contradicted clear photographic and testimonial evidence. Judge Judy explained that she had contacted court administrators in 3 separate jurisdictions where Jennifer had been involved in litigation, and all 3 were now launching internal investigations into potential corruption involving court staff who handled case files and judicial calendars. The implication could not have been more devastating. Jennifer Parker had not merely attempted to bribe a single clerk in a single case. She had been systematically manipulating the judicial system for years, leaving behind a series of victims who never received justice because she had learned how to purchase favorable outcomes. Margaret Chen sat in the plaintiff's chair with tears streaming down her face, realizing she had nearly become victim number 18, another elderly landlord harmed by someone who treated the justice system as a game she could win with enough money. Judge Judy's ruling on the original property damage case was swift and unequivocal. She ruled fully in Margaret Chen's favor, awarding the entire $12,347 in documented damages, plus an additional $8,000 in punitive damages for what she described as Jennifer's malicious, deliberate destruction of property coupled with her complete lack of remorse and accountability. But that financial judgment was insignificant compared to what came next. Judge Judy announced that she was referring Jennifer's bribery attempt to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate prosecution. She explained that bribing a court official is a federal felony under Title 18, United States Code, Section 201, punishable by up to 15 years in federal prison and fines up to 3 times the amount of the bribe. She pointed out that Jennifer's own words, captured clearly on the security recording, amounted to a full confession-making prosecution, simple and conviction almost guaranteed. Then Judge Judy delivered the final, catastrophic blow. She revealed that she had already contacted the state real estate licensing board and provided them with evidence of Jennifer's criminal conduct. This would trigger an immediate suspension of Jennifer's license. Pending a revocation hearing, she would almost certainly lose. A convicted felon cannot legally hold a real estate license in any state. Jennifer's career, the source of her wealth, and the core of her identity was effectively over the moment she slid that envelope across David Martinez's desk. The transformation in Jennifer Parker over the next minute was so dramatic that it became the most replayed moment in Judge Judy's history. The arrogant, condescending woman who had entered the courtroom brimming with false confidence collapsed into her chair, her body folding in on itself as the full weight of her downfall became impossible to deny. She began sobbing with a raw, unfiltered desperation, the kind that erupts when someone watches their entire life unravel in real time. She pleaded with Judge Judy for mercy, insisting she had children who needed her, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she hadn't fully understood what she was doing. Judge Judy's response was colder than an Arctic wind. Judge Judy announced that she was referring Jennifer's bribery attempt to the United States Attorney's Office for immediate prosecution. She explained that bribing a court official is a federal felony under Title 18, United States Code, Section 201, punishable by up to 15 years in federal prison and fines up to 3 times the amount of the bribe. She noted that Jennifer's own words on the security recording amounted to a complete confession, making prosecution simple and conviction almost guaranteed. Then Judge Judy delivered the final devastating blow. She revealed that she had already contacted the state real estate licensing board and provided them with evidence of Jennifer's criminal conduct, which would lead to the immediate suspension of her license pending a revocation hearing she would almost certainly lose. A convicted felon cannot hold a real estate license in any state. Jennifer's career, the source of her wealth, and the core of her identity, ended the moment she slid that envelope across David Martinez's desk. The change in Jennifer Parker over the next minute was so dramatic that it became the most replayed moment in Judge Judy's history. The arrogant, condescending woman who had entered the courtroom radiating false confidence collapsed into her chair, her body folding in on itself as the full magnitude of her downfall became undeniable. She began to sob with the kind of raw, desperate emotion that comes from someone watching their entire life fall apart in real time. She begged Judge Judy for mercy, insisting she had children who needed her, that she had made a terrible mistake, that she didn't understand what she was doing. Judge Judy's response was colder than an Arctic wind.